Steve Paikin. When it comes to interviews, nobody does it better. Joe Tilley's Great Canadian Sports Show. Coming up! Our special guest today was born and raised in the Hammer, Hamilton, a longtime fan of the Ticats, Red Sox, and Leafs, graduate of the University of Toronto. He did play-by-play for the Varsity Blues. He's got his master's in journalism from Boston University, honorary doctorates from Laurentian, McMaster, Toronto, and York Universities, reporter anchor for CBC News World, then anchor for The Agenda on TVO, co-host of the On Poly podcast, host of TVO at 50 podcast, host of the Hockey Time Machine, documentary producer, winner of the Silver Screen Award, author of numerous books, member of the Order of Ontario, member of the Order of Canada. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the program, Steve Paikin. Steve, great to have you on here.
Holy smokes, what an intro. That sounds like a lot to live up to, and I'm not even sure that my parents would have seconded what you said off the top before you rolled the animation, but okay, I'll play along.
And the show's over. Thank you very much. Yeah, after that intro. Listen, first of all, let's go right back to the beginning. Tell us about growing up in the Hammer.
You know, what I loved about it, Joe, was that it was just so blessedly normal. I grew up in a neighborhood with lots of kids. We played road hockey after school every day, or street football as well. And that's what I loved about it. And a lot of those people from that neighborhood I'm still friends with, still in touch with, and it's just a great place to grow up.
So it makes sense growing up in the Hammer that you'd be a Ticats fan. We'll forgive you for that B on your chest right now, but who is your favorite Ticat player?
I guess given my age and era, it would have been Tommy Joe Coffey, who was a tight end, wore number 75, and also did place kicking duties back in the day. Yeah, he'd have been my guy.
You know what? I like Tommy Joe Coffey too, but I liked him because he was an Edmonton guy, right? So he played for the Eskimos and of course the Ticats. But yeah, Tommy Joe is great. And we had,
I feel somewhat terrible saying that now that I say it out loud, because I went to school with Bernie Filoni Jr. and Wally Filoni was actually in my class, and their dad played for the Ticats, but Bernie Filoni was a little bit before my time. So right. Tommy Joe, I guess, was my guy.
I do remember Bernie Filoni for sure, but I'm just probably a couple of years older than you, so that's why. So tell us about, first the Red Sox. Hopelessly hooked on the Red Sox, you told me. Does that come from attending university there? How did you become a Red Sox fan?
I hate to admit this, Joe, but I actually went to Boston University because I was a Red Sox fan, not the other way around. If you know Boston, you know that Boston University, and in particular the School of Public Communication, which I attended, is really about a 5-minute walk from Fenway Park. So, after I graduated U of T, I basically said to myself, I got a year here to do something a little out of the ordinary. I know I want to come back to Canada and try to make a living as a journalist. So what's something I could do for a year and have, just a time? And fortunately, my folks and I agreed I could go to Boston for a year, do a master's there, went to a lot of baseball games, as you might imagine. And it all started really with the 1975 World Series. As you pointed out, we're about the same age, so you will well remember Carlton Fisk's home run in Game 6. I just fell in love with the Red Sox in 1975, and yes, of course I like the Blue Jays. But I have seen no reason to stop loving the Red Sox. That's all.
Yeah, what was it like when they finally ended the curse? Hey, what was that like?
I think I waited about 30 years for that, which is not as long as some people waited. Some people waited 86 years for that. They were actually old enough to remember the last World Series in 1918. But yeah, it was as glorious as you might imagine. And the funny thing was, when it actually happened, it was somewhat anticlimactic. Beating the Yankees after being down 0-3 was such a titanic achievement. And they won 4 straight against the Yankees to take the American League Championship Series. But then they just kept going. And they won 4 straight against the Cardinals in the World Series. And by the time they actually broke the curse of the Bambino and won that World Series in 4 straight games, you felt in some respects like it was too easy, but it was a wonderful, just a fantastic. I still have wonderful memories of having watched every game.
Yeah, nobody was thinking it was too easy when they were down 3-0 to the Yankees. So that
No
was
kidding.
unbelievable. That was
Mhm.
incredible, that comeback. So I just want to step back a bit. Tell us about your mom. She's a member of the Order of Canada. Tell us a little bit about your mom and how she got that distinction.
Well, it's hard to talk about my mom without talking about my dad because they've been a great partnership for 66 years, if you can imagine. They were
Wow.
students at the University of Western Ontario, got married when they were 23 and 20. They're now 89 and 87, and and as weird as it is to say, still in love and wonderful together. My mom's having a tough time with her health right now, but my dad is very sweet with her. And I say you have to mention the two of them together because my mom was an absolute superstar back in the day, but came up in a generation where, of course, women were expected to keep house, raise kids.
Mhm.
Dad went off and worked, and that was the way it was supposed to be. And my mother sort of quickly established in her marriage that was not the life that she intended to lead. And she became, well, can I make a bit of a list here, Joe? I mean, she was chair of governing
Yeah,
council at University of
sure.
Toronto. She was a founding chair of McMaster University Medical Center. She was a commissioner on the Ontario Human Rights Commission. She was a director for Southam Incorporated. She was chair of Atomic Energy of Canada Limited. I mean, I'll stop there, but I could go on for quite a ways. And the fact is that my dad encouraged her and really was very proud of all that she achieved. So they were both great role models. My dad, having been in business, was more a role model for my brother who's in business, and my mom being sort of uh, more in the public side of things and the interest in the humanities and the arts. I guess I took more after her.
Did you always know you're gonna be a broadcaster?
Not until my first week at U of T. Before that, I had no clue what I wanted to do. But my first week at the University of Toronto, I walked into, and for those who live outside Toronto and they may not know this building, it's called Hart House, and it's a building on the downtown campus, about a 5-minute walk from Queen's Park. It's this beautiful old Gothic building. And this was actually the week before my classes started. So I guess it's the last week of August, 1978. And I walk into this building and it's clubs night at Hart House. So you got to sort of figure out what clubs you want to join, belong to, in addition to the classes that you want to take. So I walk in and there's the geography club and the archery club and the photography club and the debate club and et cetera, et cetera. And Joe, I kid you not, I saw a table that said U of T radio, and it's like a light went off, above my head. A light bulb turned on, and I just thought, oh, I got to check this out. And I walked up to the guy behind the table. His name was Steve Kerr, I remember to this day. And I said, have you got anybody who does the play by play for the Varsity Blues hockey or football games? He said, nope. And I said, could I do it? And he said, sure. And I said, a reference that may mean something to some of your viewers and listeners. You mean I could be the Foster Hewitt of the University of Toronto? And he said, sure, because he was older than me and he got the reference. And that's how it started. And I started doing blues, hockey, and football games. My color commentator was Michael Landsberg, who, of course, had 25 plus years at the University of Toronto, at TSN, doing Off the Record. There he is. And we were horrible, but we loved it. And hopefully we got better. And we seem to have pulled a bit of a career for each of us out of this racket.
Okay, we know which career path Michael chose, but you got directed towards political spectrum. What made you, go in that direction? What was the deciding factors for you?
I got a part-time job from my local hometown newspaper, the Hamilton Spectator, in, I think it was 1979, 80, something like that. And they said to me, I was a sort of summer fill-in reporter for the regular reporters there. And they said, what do you want to do? And I said, I'm obsessed with sports. I just want to cover sports. So that's Ticats. That was Hamilton Cardinals from the Intercounty Baseball League. And,
Right.
whatever else, high school stuff, maybe the odd Argo game, whatever. And again, I remember his name, Rob Austin, who was one of the editors there, said, okay, that's very interesting. you don't get to cover any sports at all. You are 19 years old. You're far too young to specialize in sports. We are going to send you to cover city council, school board, murders, fires, all sorts of other stuff, but you're never getting near the sports department at all. And that guy changed my life, because that's when I sort of fell in love with news, current affairs, politics. And so I owe Rob Austin a lot for setting me on a path that made news my business and sports my passion.
So was it that Rob saw that in you, or was it just you, as you said, you're 19 years old, you're not doing a sports thing, that's for the older guys, and then once you start doing it, you realize that, you know what, I think this is for me. This is the way I want to go.
I think he just understood that 19 years old, at least by his reckoning, was far too young an age at which to specialize. And he thought, you're going to do everything, you know. And then if you decide sports is for you after you've had a chance to take a taste of that and a taste of that and a taste of that, well, fine. But, you know, there's a much bigger world out there besides sports that you need to at least get some exposure to before you make your mind up about your career. And that did it for me.
You know, it's pretty funny because I started my career, broadcasting career at the University of Alberta. I was taking drama. I was going to be an actor, but I started working for the campus radio station and doing, sports reports, and got a chance to do some Golden Bears play-by-play, and it was so much fun. And realized that, yeah, this is definitely the way I'm going to go. And sent some tapes out, and the next thing you know, there we go. So, how did you end up at TVO? Because that's, obviously where we all know you from, and that's where you became your staple. And yeah, home.
Yeah, I've been at TVO 30 years now, which is hard to imagine, but I've done 5 different shows. 4 of them got canceled, so I seem to have trouble hanging on to a job here. But the agenda, which I host now, just finished year 17. That's the 5th show I've done at TVO. But I was 10 years somewhere else before that. You know, after I finished U of T, went to Boston U, as you pointed out, got my degree, came back. First job was at CHFI and CFTR, as it was then called, 680 News now, or City News 680, whatever they call it. Everybody's rebranding all the time. I can't keep up. And I was a Toronto City Hall reporter for 3 years there, and then did 7 years at the CBC, a bunch of different jobs. And the guy who hired me at CBC said, you really have to meet a fella at TVO named Peter Herndorf. He wants to meet you because he's about to start something new and you might be right for it. And I had that meeting with Peter. And again, there's another guy who changed my life. Peter, who sadly just died a few months ago, was a guy who opened a door for me at TVO. And I started doing a show there called Studio 2 back in before that. I started doing 2 shows before Studio 2, which no one will remember. But then Studio 2 came along for, I think, 14 seasons in 1994. 12 seasons. Joe, who can remember this stuff anymore? And then the agenda after that, and I'm still going.
Okay, so here we go. In 1992, we have the clip from your debut with the late, great Elway Yost. Let's roll that, Vic.
Oh, boy.
Here. Led by you. You won't remember this, but I interviewed you when I was at Newsworld once. You told me some of the great movies that you'd enjoyed watching that year.
Good grief, how long was that? How long ago?
It was a few years ago.
40 years ago, eh? Wow.
It wasn't 40 years ago, but it was long enough ago. It's great to be here. I've always admired the programming that you folks do here at TVOntario. I'm thrilled that I'm going to be able to join you and do some of it.
Okay, your thoughts looking at that kid.
Oh, my gosh. Well, that's a 32-year-old kid instead of a 63-year-old man, which is what I am now. And I can't tell you how choked up I get when I watch that video, because Elway Yost was as he was to so many people, right, Joe? He was Mr. TVO. And the fact that he welcomed me there on my first ever time on camera there, and at one point he put his hand on my arm and he said, welcome, you're going to do a lot of good work here over the years. And I'm not sure I believed him, but that was so meaningful to me. And, his son, Graham Yost, has become a huge success in Hollywood. And I've had a chance to interview Graham a couple of times over the years about his dad. And, the two of us can get a little weepy if we start going on too long about Elway, because obviously he was a great professional and personal influence for Graham, and just rolled out a beautiful welcome mat for me. And I love looking at that clip. Thank you for playing that.
Well, you could tell in that clip, he was very welcoming and not pretentious in any way. It was really a beautiful moment, actually. So, okay, now you went from interviewer to interviewee a little while back. You were interviewed by former Premier Liberal leader Bob Rae, and one of the audience members asked about your career choices. Let's roll some of that, Vic.
2 minutes here on some principles that I use when I ask questions, and feel free to steal. These are not mine. These I learned many, many years ago from a guy named John Sawatsky, who has, I think, done probably more than anybody else I know to try to, really put down on paper and to quantify and to really think hard about the principles behind asking a good question. And as strange as this sounds, the first thing you have to do is actually ask a question, as opposed to make a statement. So that's a good place to start. And I've always found that asking a kind of neutral, open-ended question also helps.
Okay, that was I got my clips mixed up. There's another one with you and Bob Rae. That we didn't have, it was not there, but
I remember that very well,
you're
Joe.
basically,
and that,
yeah. So tell us about
that. Thing is that the principles that I learned from John Sawatsky, who was a journalism professor at Carleton University and an author and investigative journalist. I write those down, and I've got them on a bulletin board above my desk, and I look at them all the time because, I think he's right. I think those are the principles that if you follow them, you will get a decent interview. And, as I said in that clip there, how many times do you see people do interviews who don't actually ask a question? They make a statement, they sort of move the mic over like that, and they expect you to say something. And okay, so I think those principles make a lot of sense, and I've tried to follow them. And I don't say this with any false modesty. I keep going back to work every day because one of these days I really want to do the perfect interview. I haven't done it yet. It's hard to do. Interviews go all over the place. They don't follow, when you go in there with your question sheet. I've never done an interview where you start at question 1 and go 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It just doesn't work that way. They take on a life and a meandering of their own. So I'm going to keep trying it until I get it right.
Yeah, and then sometimes you can fuse your clips and throw the wrong clips in there. But ultimately,
we roll with it.
We roll with it. And you know what? You talked. I saw you talking. I can't remember what it was, but I saw you talking about the worst interview ever. Tell us a little bit about that. Do you remember now? Is it fresh in your mind?
I sure do. Well, the one I always think of is Mordecai Richler, who, again, for your younger listeners and viewers, was a great Canadian author, no longer alive, but out of Quebec, Jewish guy out of Quebec, strong Anglophone rights guy who did not love the fact that he felt like a person, a minority in Quebec whose rights were constantly infringed upon. At least that was his view. And Mordecai was on a book tour, and he came in. This was for the show I used to do, Studio 2. And I thought the best way I knew he was a prickly guy and I knew he could be a difficult interviewee. And so I saw him in the green room ahead of time and I chatted him up and I tried to ingratiate myself with him by what's the best way to do that? You say something nice about someone's kids. And his son, Daniel Richler, used to host a book show at TVO called Imprint. And he was an acquaintance of mine. And when I left CBC to go to TVO, I asked Daniel's advice about whether I should make the move. And he was actually very helpful in giving me advice about what to expect. And I told all this to Mordecai thinking, if I say something nice about his kid, he's surely going to like me and give me a good interview. Well, I'll tell you what, we got out there on the set and it felt like every answer he gave was 3 words long. I just couldn't break through. We just could not establish any rapport whatsoever. And this show, Joe, back in the day, the format was you do the interview, the director cuts to a wide shot, he cuts the mics, we sit there for 5 seconds with some lip flap, and then he fades to black. And in that Mordecai Richler interview, it was so bad that when the director cut to the wide shot, what you saw was not Steve and Mordecai talking for another 5 seconds before fading to black. You saw Mordecai rip his microphone off and walk off the set. He wouldn't even wait 5 seconds for the shot to go to black. And as you can perhaps tell, I'm still a little bit haunted by that interview to this day because it was so bad.
It makes you wonder, though, why he would do that in the first place. Why do the interview in the first place if you're not absolutely not engaged and don't want to do this at all? But clearly another important, job of the interviewer is listening and also having good producers, right? Because our buddy Vic here, a producer of this show, has managed to round up that Bob Ray viz. So let's take a look at that clip now, Vic.
Down the road, have you thought about, or might you consider changing gears dramatically, maybe departing from the agenda and getting into the role of a more opinionated role like we see with Piers Morgan on CNN or Rex Murphy?
So the question to Steve is, does he want to become Piers Morgan or Rex Murphy?
Candidly, I am jealous of those guys who are able to put so much of their opinions into their questions. There are moments where I'm jealous, not often, but from time to time. But I don't see it happening. As long as I'm doing what I'm doing, it's certainly not going to happen. And I don't have a burning desire to do it. I don't think, boy, I have these thoughts running around in my head, and I so desperately need to inflict them on the viewing public. I just don't feel that way. I think I do what I do because I'm way more interested in what he thinks than in what I think. And it's one of the reasons why I have the job that I have, is because I don't really care what I think about stuff. I really am interested in what they think about stuff.
And is that it? Like getting the best out of your subject and finding out what they got there as opposed to your own opinion?
You know, the funny thing about that interview, Joe, I remember this well. This was at Harborfront. It was an author's series, and I had a new book called Paikin and the Premiers, in which I sort of wrote a chapter about my relationship with and understanding of and previous interviews with premiers going all the way back to Bill Davis. And I'd written a book on John Robarts, who was premier from 1961 to 71. So essentially, you got a half century of relationship with Ontario premiers there. And they kind of surprised me by having Bob Ray be the guy who was going to interview me. And so often during that interview, Bob Ray would ask me a question, and then I'd ask him a question back. Because as I say, I was more interested in what he had to say than what I had to say. And Mr. Ray would constantly say to me, no, that's not the way it's going to work tonight. You don't get to ask me anything. I ask you the questions, you have to answer them. And he probably had to say it 3 times during the course of the interview because I was more interested in what he thought about some of the things that had come up. So yeah, I'm in the job I'm in, and I'm working at the place I'm working at because I think it's just it's just a perfect reflection of what I'm interested in and the way in which I want to do journalism. And there's never going to be any danger of me wanting to be Tucker Carlson or Piers Morgan or Rex Murphy, because that's just not how I'm wired.
Yeah, and nor would we want you to be, honestly. Okay, so here's another example of you being interviewed. This is from the agenda, this time by Nam Kiwanuka, and after you wrote your book on John Turner. So let's watch some of that.
You mentioned that you did get permission from his wife, Jill, and you said that there might be some things in this book that she might not be very happy with. So how much cooperation did you get from the family? How did you go around about writing this book?
Well, there have been other books about John Turner in the past, but none of them has had the cooperation of the family in the way that this one did. I'm pleased to say. They were extremely helpful. Mrs. Turner, who I guess is about 83 now and lives 5 minutes from the studio, she was just remarkably helpful in family archives, in pictures. That picture, she took that picture on the cover of the book. I probably emailed her 100 times over the past couple of years, following up on fact checks because she's really good on that. And she sat down for a couple of very long interviews with me as well, which was very helpful. She had a very tempestuous relationship with the press when her husband was prime minister. So the fact that she would open herself up to another journalist, I found surprising and wonderful.
So is that the key, persistence in that case, or?
I think maybe persistence, but I think also timing. I think when I wrote the book on John Turner, which just came out a few months ago, Mr. Turner had died. And I think at this point, the family, and I interviewed Mrs. Turner, as I indicated a couple of times, and her 3 kids as well. There are only 3 surviving kids. One child died in his early 50s, shortly after his father did. And I think at that time, they were kind of ready to talk to a reporter who had demonstrated that I wasn't out to sort of play gotcha with anybody. I wanted to write a balanced book about Mr. Turner's life. It's interesting, Joe, you wouldn't think there was necessarily a 300-page book in the life of a guy who was prime minister for 79 days. as John Turner was in 1984, but I found him to have had a most intriguing life, who did so many other things of interest, both good and bad, over the course of his 91 years of life, that that I thought it was worth doing a book on. And I guess it was partly timing, and hopefully, partly my approach to doing these books that enabled the family to say yes. And as a result, I think I got stories, and I think I got cooperation in a way that other authors have not in the past. And I hope it reflects well in the book.
Isn't that great? Well, I mean, it really, I think, really, isn't that kind of the definition of journalism, just to tell the story as opposed to trying to play I gotcha or whatever, right?
Well, part of the story, I mean, for sure. I mean, let's be honest. Mr. Turner was prime minister for 79 days because he wasn't very good in the job, and he made some bad decisions, like calling a snap election when he wasn't as popular as he thought he was. And September 4th, 1984, Brian Mulroney comes in and wins the biggest majority government in Canadian history at John Turner's expense. So, he made some mistakes, and those mistakes are talked about in the book. So a good, balanced story of a guy's life that encompassed more than just those 79 days, I think was worth doing. And other people were more interested in just, and I understand this, they were more interested in just his failures, and so focused on that in previous books. There was one other author who was only interested in his successes and didn't refer to any of the failures. And that doesn't tell the whole story either. I think given timing, given my relationship with the family, I was able to tell both sides of the story, and I'm glad I did it.
We talked about your worst interview with Mordecai. What do you think is your best interview? What was the interview that sticks out for you as this is the best?
I'd like to say the next one, but I don't know who that's with yet. But I don't really look back all that much. I don't look back and think, boy, was that one ever good? Or, you asked me about the worst one, so I told the story, but I don't think about it.
Right.
I try not to think about it very much. I've had a chance to interview some pretty crazy important people during the course of my so-called career. Like Mikhail Gorbachev came to Toronto once, and through a contact that I knew with who knew him and who had been a guest on our program, managed to get an interview with him. Now, was it my best? I don't know. It's hard to say. You got to go through a translator, so it's hard to create a rapport. But the feeling you get sitting 2 feet away from somebody who absolutely changed the course of world history is profound. I've had a chance to interview Jimmy Carter and Bill Clinton, two American presidents. I think every prime minister going back to Brian Mulroney, certainly every premier going back to Bill Davis, although the current premier of Ontario has yet to appear as premier on the agenda. He's been on as a candidate for the PC party leadership. He was on as a candidate for Toronto mayor. He was on as an author because he and his brother Rob did a book several years ago, but I have yet to be able to snag Doug Ford for an interview in the studio yet during his premiership, which is now almost 5 years old. Hope springs eternal that will happen someday, but you never know. But it's probably 30,000 people that I've had a chance to interview at this stage of my life. So to pick a best one is really hard.
Okay, well, we found one that we thought was pretty good. Let's roll that one, Vic.
Reflections on a half century of Ontario leaders. It's on bookshelves nationwide as of the 28th of September. And joining us now here in our studio to tell us more about this book is the author, Steve Paikin, who's the host of The Agenda with Steve Paikin. Steve, it's good to have you here.
It's a pleasure to be here. Always wondered what it's like to sit on this side of the table.
How does it feel to finally add the title author to your list of credits?
Well, this is actually my fifth book, so I guess technically I'm already a published author, but it really was a labor of love.
That's some pretty fancy footwork there, eh, Joe?
Yeah. Well done. Yeah. So anyway, that was pretty good. Paul Pasco has dug up some, Paul, he's incredible. So you've written a lot of books, and one of the sports related books that I want to talk about is how hockey saved itself. This came about in 2007, a couple years after the lockout. Now, at the time, you indicated the salary cap and some of the changes were good things. Do you think hockey has saved itself, or has your opinion changed on what hockey has done since then?
No, I think my opinion from having written that book, and that was I got to say that was a heck of a lot of fun. I've written 8 books now, and most of them are about people in politics, and um, that book was a hell of a lot of fun, I got to say, and it reminded me about how joyous it can be to be a sports reporter, or in this case, writing about sports. Because I basically said to the publisher, "Okay, you want me to write this book on former Ontario Premier John Robarts, and I will do that, and that's fine. But that's it. I only ever wanted to write one book, and I think the Robarts book was my third one. And then after the Robarts book came out, they said, "Well, we really like another book out of you." And I said, "No, I'm done." And they said, "What about hockey?" And I said, "Oh, wait, that's different." Because I basically spent a year while doing my regular duties at TVO. Going to hockey games all over North America, hanging out at arenas, talking to hockey players. One of the most enjoyable interviews I did, this really surprised me. I walked into the Leaf dressing room after a practice one day because I wanted to interview Ty Domi for a chapter in that book. And I walked up and introduced myself, and he said, "I know who you are." And that really surprised me because nobody in any locker room, in any dressing room in the NHL knows who I am. I cover news. I don't cover any sports at all. So they didn't have a clue who I was. And I said, so I sat down beside him, and he said, "Yeah, I know. You're the guy who you moderate the leaders debates during election time, and I've seen your show." And this really surprised me. And Ty and I had just a terrific conversation about the role of the enforcer in the game, and the fact that with the new rules coming in and no more clutch and grab and a much less significant influence on fighting, whether or not he felt somewhat of an endangered species in the game. But Joe, doing that book was just so much fun because it did tap into that little kid in me who just wants to talk to hockey players and find out how they do what they do. As I said, I'm 63 and I still play hockey once or twice a week because I love the game so much. And I've just always, I'm no good, but I love it. And I've just always wanted to find out from these guys how they do what they do, because I think it's just such a difficult game to play and yet so joyous to play. And so that book was really a tremendous amount of fun to write.
Yeah, and Ty does have a lot on the ball, and for those who've had a chance to meet him, it strikes a lot of people. It surprises them that he has so much on the ball, but he is a sharp guy.
And also, Joe,
Now,
he was dating Belinda Stronach at the time, and she was a member of, future member of Parliament. So he certainly knew his politics and was aware of what was going on far more than you might give him credit for.
right. So in the book, you talked about your concerns over the hockey in the southern U.S. Is that improved, that situation, or where do you think they're at now?
Well, it's the best of times and worst of times, right? I mean, look what Florida did this past year. Look what Tampa Bay has done the past number of years. Dallas is a very strong franchise. You'd have to say that the Gretzky influence in Southern California has put very solid franchises there, and in the Kings and the Ducks and the Sharks. But then there's Arizona. And, Arizona just has, for whatever reason, it's a top 10 market in the States. And for whatever reason, it's just been mistake after mistake after mistake. And I sort of have sympathy with Commissioner Bettman's desire to find a solution there, because it is hard for people who've followed a team for a couple of decades and fall in love with it to suddenly lose your team. We all know what that's like with, the Winnipeg Jets once upon a time, the Montreal Expos. If you want to go to basketball, Vancouver Grizzlies, losing a team can be hard for a community. So I get why he's trying to make sure he leaves no stone unturned. But boy, they have just not made it work there in any way, shape, or form. And, I can think of a lot of places that would love to see an NHL team right now. And, Quebec City be at the top of my list.
Oh.
Hamilton, Ontario, my home team, might be second on the list, although I don't like their chances of getting one. But, if they don't want to make it work in Arizona, let them go somewhere else where it will work.
Quebec would be the answer, no doubt about it. And it's the only reason that it's not the answer is because they want to keep that if you want to call it that, a foothold in Arizona, but there's no foothold there. It's a pretty slimy rock that they're trying to get their foot onto there. And so, yeah, it's just tried one thing after another, and nothing has worked. And now they're playing in a 4,000 seat arena, which is an embarrassment to the NHL. And you know, what they really need is somebody with deep pockets who wants to build an arena and doesn't care if they make any money. And good luck finding that person, right?
Or the guy who owns the Suns. You know, he could always buy them, and they
Right.
could be co-tenants with the Phoenix Suns basketball team. That'd probably work as well.
Right, right. You know, and it's that might work, but then you lose the Ottawa franchise, and that would piss a lot of people off. Let's face it. So now you, yeah, because I mean, Ryan Reynolds wanted to buy a team. So why doesn't Ryan Reynolds buy that team?
Works for me.
Yeah. Okay. All right, Ryan, get on that. So you mentioned, like, okay, we know you're a sports fan, and of course, once in a while you get a chance to have sports personality on your show. And now, being a Ticats fan, I'm thinking you might have been a little bit jealous when you looked at that ring. Argos linebacker Enoch Mwamba was on the show recently to show off his ring. Let's roll that, Vic.
I was on the design committee and said, let's put in some diamonds in there. So we put some diamonds on the CN Tower as well, the design committee. We got some stars here that symbolize the amount of wins we had in Toronto as well. And then on the other side, what we decided to do was we have each player's name, their number, and we have the BMO field over there with all the banners of all the championships that we've won over the years. And it's been amazing. And inside we have a quote and a saying that we've been talking about, you know, throughout the season. It basically says, three-strand cord is not easily broken. And we have one that wraps all the way around. It's pretty unique, as well as the final score, 24-23, against the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. So a lot to talk about on there. And like I said, it tells the story of the season last year.
Oh,
a three-string cord.
You're killing me.
Yeah, you hate that, eh? The Argos. Got to go back a ways to find the last Ticats, man. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, you're really rubbing it in now. Yeah, no Grey Cups in Hamilton since 1999, and we were one play away in hosting the Grey Cup 2 years ago against Winnipeg. Lost it in overtime. That was so close.
Yeah.
But you know, I have to say, in all candor, there are two guys on the Argonauts you can't help but love. Pinball is one of them, and he's the only guy who I've seen get a standing ovation at the former Iverwin Stadium in Hamilton, because everybody loves pinball. And this guy, Enoch Mwamba, is such a fact. Question, but that he's going to go into broadcasting when his career is over. He's just absolutely a fantastic communicator. And I felt, you know, I felt him that if it couldn't be Hamilton, that he got a chance to win a Grey Cup ring so deep into his playing career, because he's played for a very long time. And good for him. He's a lovely guy. You know, I asked him at the end of that interview, could you, I don't mind if you go 14-4, but could you please lose 4 games to the Ticats this year? And he refused to make that agreement with me. So I don't know.
Yeah, I wouldn't know. That's not happening. I mean, when the Argos play the Ticats, it's always just a little more intensity than anybody else. So now you're also host of a show called Hockey Time Machine. Great show, great program. Paul Pasca's involved with that one. And tell us about the Hockey Time Machine and your involvement.
Well, this was a little thing that literally came together by accident during COVID. And there were just like a bunch of hockey fans, I don't know, maybe 10 of us, 15 of us, who just used to get together every Thursday night on a Zoom call just to talk hockey. And, you know, our friend Paul is one of them. And Glenn Dreyfus in Seattle is another guy. There are people from all over North America who just wanted to get together and talk hockey. And somehow the word got out. And then the New York Times did a story on it. And it started to grow. And then former players and former coaches wanted to be on the thing. And the clip that you just showed was from a show that I put together with, I mean, can you imagine this? We had Ken Dryden, Scotty Bowman, Serge Savard, Yvonne Cornwallier, Larry Robinson, and Steve Shutt. 6 Hall of Famers, all from the dynasty of the Habs in the 1970s, all coming onto what turned into a little show on YouTube to talk about those glory days. And we've done I did a show once on the 70th anniversary of Bill Barilko's overtime winning, Stanley Cup winning goal for the Maple Leafs in the 50s, which I think is still the most important goal scored in Leaf history. We had Barilko's nephew on that program. Jerry McNamara, the ex-Leaf GM, was on that show because he was actually at the game. A bunch of other people, the son of the Canadiens goaltender who gave up the overtime goal. We had him on. Anyway, a bunch of guests. And this has been just sort of a great way to scratch a hockey itch during COVID when we couldn't go to games and there was nothing to talk about. But we got together, we talked, and now, what was the last one I did? I did one last week, I think. And Glenn also hosts lots of the shows. We got a bunch of people. Kevin Shea is another hockey writer. He hosts them as well. So we all take turns. And I did an interview last week with a University of Manitoba professor who just wrote a book about the history of Maple Leaf Gardens. So that was a lot of fun. I've, of course, been to, I don't know, dozens, hundreds of games in the Gardens over the years. So that was great fun to do that. And yeah, it's just been a chance to talk hockey. And I'm amazed at the like some of the high profile guests who've wanted to come on that show and we did a Team Canada 72 50th anniversary show. We love hockey. We love talking hockey, and that's given me a sort of a little outlet to do it.
Yeah, and necessity is the mother of invention, as they say. When Zoom is the only chance we had to talk about hockey during that period of time, and here we are. And we had Kevin Shea and Frank, his nephew, Bill Barilko's nephew, Frank Klisanovich, or Klisanich, I think it is.
Klisanich.
On the Klisanich, to talk about that goal and the Bill Barilko story. So that was pretty cool. But okay, you talked about that Habs Dynasty show. Well, let's roll that clip.
Hey, Coach, you get to go next. You had so much talent on this team. No doubt some strong personalities too. What was the key to coaching them?
Well, we had a very unselfish team. Like the players had said, we could play any style. And, you got the Hall of Fame players on the ice here, and some had been there in the 60s. It's always been something in Montreal, passing the torch down, and which has been very impossible in the last couple of decades.
I know I never thought I was as good as Jacques Plante. I doubt that Scotty ever thought that he was as good as Toe Blake. And I think in a lot of ways what happened is that I mean we just kept playing and being what we were and winning as we were. And for me at least, it was much later that I realized that in fact maybe we were the best ever. And maybe part of it was that we never thought we were, and that we were always we left the other teams behind in the NHL. But I don't know that we ever felt as if we left behind those players from the 1950s that won 5 in a row.
For me, Doug Harvey was the best defenseman ever until Bobby Orr arrived, and that's a different time. And then you had other players like Larry, but Doug Harvey, I don't think I ever came close to the talent of those guys.
So one word sticks out for me when I see that, and it's humility, right? Like these guys, what an incredible team, a superstar team, superstar laden team, winners of 4 Stanley Cups in a row. But none of them are going to say, "Oh, we were pretty awesome," or "I was pretty awesome." They're all great, giving credit to the guys who came before, and yeah.
Joe, I got to tell you, if I can, 2 quick stories about the first 2 guys you showed clips of there. I've always felt I've only met Scotty Bowman in person once, and then we talked to him in that interview there. I've always felt a bit of a connection to him, even though I'm a lifelong Leaf fan, and I never liked the Habs, of course, and those dynasties used to just drive me up the wall. But I remember taking a baseball road trip with my dad and a couple other people to Pittsburgh when Scotty was running things there for the Penguins. This is the era of Mario and Jaromir and so on. And
Paul Coffey,
we just decided we're going to pull up to the arena because there's a semifinal Stanley Cup playoff hockey game happening the day after the baseball game that we're going to go to, and we're going to try and get tickets. And as we pull up, Scotty Bowman is walking into the arena, and I said I felt a connection to Scotty. He's got the same birthday as my brother, September 18th, and he's the same age as my dad. He's going to be 89 in September. I can't get over it. Scotty, he's just in amazing shape. So my dad rolls down the window of the car, seeing Scotty Bowman, and yells at him, "Hey, Scotty, you got a couple of tickets for tomorrow night's hockey game for a couple of guys who drove all the way from Hamilton, Ontario? Scotty looks at my dad and he says, sure, come here tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock and I'll get you in. And we thought, there's no way this is going to happen, but what the hell, we'll give it a try. And we show up the next day at 9 o'clock at the box office, and there's Scotty who says, give these fellas a couple of my tickets. We paid for them, of course, but give these fellas a couple of my tickets. And like, oh my gosh, like how fantastic was that? Like what a guy to do that kind of thing. Now, Ken Dryden has, one of the great joys of my life is that I have become friends with Ken Dryden. And he's a regular viewer of the agenda, and he emails me every now and then with his views on where I have not kept up the side very well. And he's got great constructive criticism, because remember, Ken's not your typical hockey guy, right? This is a guy who's a lawyer. This is a guy who did a study on education for former Premier Bill Davis. This is a guy who's authored books. He's a brilliant guy. And the fact that he takes an interest in this show that I'm doing enough to send me emails and suggestions. And we've had him on every time he's got a book out. We have him on as a guest because I just love talking to him. And in fact, I think a few weeks ago, he's got a brilliant daughter who's a Harvard educator who we had on the program as well. And that was really wonderful having her on. And we talked about educating refugee kids all over the world, which is her area of expertise. And then after 20 minutes of that, I said, okay, I got one more question for you. Who's your favorite goalie in the history of the NHL? And I got to get one question in about her dad. I can't leave that alone. So, and she sort of looked sheepishly and smiled and said, my dad? Because I hadn't mentioned the fact, that she was the daughter of up until that point. So anyway, it's really been, and I titled, we talked about that book I wrote about hockey earlier. My title of my book was The New Game. And it was a direct ripoff from Ken Dryden's The Game, which is probably the best sports book ever written. And I wanted to call mine The New Game because in one respect, paying homage to him and his literary efforts, and also all the new rules and the new system that had come in that made the game, I think, better and more interesting. So anyway, that's a very long answer, but I love the fact that all these Montreal Canadian legends would come together and do a show on that dynasty. They'd never been together doing a show before, and they did one for your pal Paul and me and Glenn, and it was just
Laura.
lovely.
Yeah. That was pretty awesome. So, that just doesn't happen. And again, it's like the circumstances of the world, put all this together, and here we go. Here we are. So I got to ask you before you leave. So, what's the best advice you've ever received?
I think if you're talking professionally, the best advice I ever got was from the dean of the journalism school that I went to at Boston University, who on my last day of school, his name was David Claytell, no longer with us, sadly, but a great influence on my life. The day of my last class at BU, I went up to him and I said, okay, I got to go back to Canada now and try to get a job. What's the one thing I can tell prospective employers? And he said, you tell them you can do everything, because you can. You've been well trained here. You can do news, sports, entertainment, weather, whatever. You can do television, magazine writing, newspapering, radio. You can do short form pieces. You can do medium-sized pieces. You can do long form documentaries. You've taken a course in being a news director, so you know how to do management side of things as well. He basically said, there's not a job in Canada in media that you are now not qualified to do, so just go get it. And it took a long time. I was looking for work in the teeth of the worst recession since the Great Depression in the early 1980s. So it took a year, but I eventually got a job, and I'm, knock on wood, yet to be fired. I've worked 40 straight years in the business in all sorts of different stuff. So his advice was very good, taken to heart, and I hope I have done him and others a little bit of proud over the course of the 40 years that I've been in journalism.
Well, that was a great summary, and and a great confidence builder, because it helps you to realize, yeah, I have done all those things. But another thing I heard too is always say yes. Oh, can you edit? Oh yeah, sure. Oops.
Yep.
But somebody's going
That's
to teach
excellent
you,
advice.
right? Somebody's
Just
gonna
say
teach
yes.
you.
Not Nancy Reagan, just say no. David Claytel, just say yes.
Just say yes, yeah, when they ask you to do something. Well, that was awesome. Steve, thank you for taking the time to do this, and enjoy your time up in Manitoulin Island. And the internet was pretty darn good.
The wind was blowing in the right direction, so it held up. And I can't thank you enough for asking me to do this. You know, I do get asked to talk a lot about sort of politics and the state of affairs in the country and the world. I never get asked to talk about sports, and I love it so much. So this was just so wonderful to get a chance to talk about stuff that I love and am passionate about, but never really get the chance to talk about. So thank you, Joe.
All right. I know it's, you know, your heart is here anyway. So thank you, sir. More sports when we come back. My Costa Swiss pick of the week. Well, last week I took the number 3 horse, Smashing Rackets, in the 8th race at Mohawk. Whoops. The $103,000 second leg of the Grassroots Series for 3-year-old trotting fillies, but she never found any room. Righteous Resolve sure did. She came from well back in the pack, flying on the outside, got it done in 153 even. James McDonald drove for trainer-owner Matt Bax. Baroness Hill was second, followed by Stonebridge Bravo, and check out that finish by Righteous Resolve.
Righteous Resolve wins it. Baroness Hill finishes second. Stonebridge Bravo was third.
This week, I'm looking at Thursday night's 6th race, first leg of the Ontario Sire Stakes Gold Series for 2-year-old trotting fillies. Babies now here. I'm liking the number 5 horse, Resolute Lady, driven by James McDonald. Let's go $5 win place, and the 256 exacta and trifecta. For all the racing updates, visit Costa TV on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Go to hpibet.com for your wagering options.
Joe Tilley Sports is brought to you by COSA, Central Ontario Standardbred Association, providing a united voice for harness horse people racing at Ontario tracks. Check out your benefits today at COSAonline.com and check out COSA TV on Facebook and YouTube for all the latest harness news and live action updates. Live racing year-round. Go to hpibet.com for all your wagering options. Become a member today, and your first bet is free. That's hpibet.com. Addiction Rehab Toronto, Toronto's #1 alcohol and drug treatment center, saving lives, reuniting families. The only treatment center in the province to offer medical detox, treatment, sober living, and lifetime aftercare all in one place. Our unique and specialized programs are designed to equip our clients with the tools to successfully lead a life of dignity, respect, and purpose. Let us help save your life or your loved one's life. Call today for more information or to facilitate an intervention. 1-855-787-2424 or visit addictionrehabtoronto.ca. Guests on Joe Tilley Sports receive a gift certificate from Classica Imports. Top of the line imported men's clothing. Check out the Classica Essential Collection now. Go to shopclassica.com.
And we want to thank all the folks who make this show possible. These are friends, trusted business associates, and all-around great people. We highly recommend them all. Thank you for your support of Canadian and local sports. A reminder that the show is available on iTunes, Spotify, Breaker, Radio Public, Google Podcasts, and Pocket Cast, as well as the Spanglish Network, Buzz TV Live, and Zingo TV. Also, check out the show on YouTube. All of our past great shows are there. Some clips, some shorts. You're going to love it, folks. Like and subscribe. It is absolutely free. Thanks once again to Steve Paikin for being on the show. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.
Do you want to buy or sell a home? Could 31 years of real estate experience help you? Why not speak to an amazing team that loves to overpromise and overdeliver? Aldo has a tremendous team of experts on staff. They are committed to making your next real estate transaction smooth and comfortable. Call 416-GET-ALDO or visit getaldo.com.
MNP, a leading Canadian national accounting, tax, and business accounting firm. MNP proudly serves and responds to the need of their clients in the private, public, and nonprofit sectors. Through partner-led engagements, MNP provides a collaborative, cost-effective approach to do business and personal strategies to help people and organizations to succeed across the country and around the world. With local offices in Oshawa, Mississauga, Burlington, and more, their team is here to support you. Visit mnp.ca today to learn more.
Brian Gribben Insurance Planning, helping you solidify your financial future.
At BGIP, what we do that's unique in the marketplace is we show people how to spend and enjoy their money in the early years of retirement without the fear of running out. Also, we're able to do this without you having to change financial advisors. Please look us up at bgip.ca today. Let's book a 30-minute phone call to see how we can bring value to you and your family in your planning.
Call Brian today for all your retirement needs. We did. 905-686-5678.
The Shot of the Week is brought to you by Sleepy Hollow Country Club. 60 years of tradition, providing a challenging and enjoyable golf experience just minutes from Toronto. Attention security seekers. Ready to take control? Introducing Corporate Protection and Investigative Services, your ultimate solution. Retailers tired of losing profits to theft? Our retail loss prevention experts have you covered. Mobile patrol, close body protection, insured door persons, we've got your security needs covered from all angles. Background investigations and civil recovery programs, trust us for thorough solutions. Licensed by the Ministry of Solicitor General, fully insured and bonded. Visit www.corporateprotection.ca or call 1-800-827-1692 for top-notch security and private investigation services. Joe Tilley here. My wife Penny Claire and I recently took an amazing trip to Egypt and Jordan with Trip Oppo. And here are our top 10 must-dos. Number 5, one of the most unforgettable experiences we had, a hot air balloon ride above the enigmatic Valley of the Kings and Queens. I would highly recommend that you book your next trip through Trip Oppo. Call them today.